Darkcast Network, indie pods with a dark side.
Welcome to part 2 of our series covering the disappearance of Maura Murray. If you missed the first part, I highly recommend listening before diving into this episode. Julie Murray, Maura's older sister, shared childhood memories about growing up together in Hanson, Massachusetts, Maura's time at West Point and UMass, and insights into Maura's state of mind when she went missing. Maura had a lot on her plate at the time of her disappearance, and that's putting it lightly. She had recently transferred schools and had gotten into trouble for using someone else's credit card, which landed her on 3 months of probation. She was also trying to support her older sister, Kathleen, who was fighting her own battle with addiction and a less than supportive partner. To top it off, 2 days before she went missing, she wrecked her dad's car after leaving a dorm party, which left her feeling guilty and ashamed. Needless to say, she was going through it.
We know the last episode ended pretty abruptly in the timeline of events, but I promise we had good reason. See, things get fuzzy very quickly the night Maura disappeared, and we didn't want to start treading that path at the end of the first half and confuse you. So we're going to confuse you now instead. Julie helped to break down the events in an understandable way, as well as point out the poor investigation, missteps, and misinformation surrounding Maura's disappearance. She also shared with us what life is like for her family, living with a missing family member, current happenings in the case, and her Engage with Empathy campaign, along with what is planned for the 20-year vigil in February of 2024. I'm Gina.
And I'm Amber.
And this is part 2 of the disappearance of Maura Murray.
At the end of part 1, we learned that according to official documents, Cecil Smith arrived on the scene at 7:46 p.m. and found Maura's abandoned black Saturn. But he later stated that he arrived around 7:35 p.m., which means he would have been there when Butch Atwood, the bus driver, placed his call at 7:42 p.m. Butch's home was only about 100 meters from the accident site, and he could see Maura's car from his house. So if he saw a police officer on the scene, why would he call for help? That's not the only issue with this initial timeline either.
The other issue is that there's another witness that drove by the scene of where Maura's car was found, but she had been passed by a police SUV with their lights on, and she was passed twice, which is weird. And based on her timeline from when it finally got into cell service on the other side of Route 112 up towards Lincoln, east of where Maura's car was found, it wouldn't have been possible for her to have passed the accident scene at 7:46 because the call that she made when she first got cell service on the east side of 112 was at 7:52. So it's at least 14 to 15 minutes to get from where Maura's car was found to that point where you first get cell service. So she could not have possibly passed by the scene at 7:46 when Cecil said that he was there. So that would put somebody there, an officer there much earlier, about 10 minutes before Cecil Smith clocked in. So I don't want to rewrite history, and I want to go with what's documented, and what's documented is the 7:46 timestamp where Cecil clocks in and says, "I'm there." Whether he broke protocol or not and was on the scene 10 minutes before and never called in, that's just speculation because we can't prove that. All we can prove is that he clocked in at 7:46. So that leads us to, well, who was this other officer speeding down, passing this other witness twice? So it's very confusing. And this is the night of. So, we've had 20 years to kind of think about this and go over all the possibilities, but my family couldn't, and still hasn't gotten a straight answer from day one. And now we're 20 years down the road and we still don't have a concrete answer as to what actually happened.
Cecil Smith initially searched Maura's car and noted in his report that the car was locked. However, there was another witness who said she drove by and the car doors were open. We don't know which statement is true because the car was towed away the same night. There was damage to the car, a small dent in the hood on the driver's side, a cracked windshield that looks like someone might have hit their head, and a white scuff mark on the driver's side rear bumper. Julie has clarified on TikTok that Maura didn't hit a tree because the dent is too bumpy and doesn't resemble that kind of damage. Interestingly, the car had a black box that tracked two events that occurred within 0.02 of a second from each other. The first event is the black box waking up, and the second event is the deployment of the airbags. Julie theorizes that maybe the sensors activated when the car went into the ravine and then tracked the impact. The black box data also indicated that Maura was only going about 20 miles per hour at the time of the accident. We know Maura steered the car back out of the ravine because it was found facing the wrong direction on the road. This factor led investigators to initially clock it as a DUI walkaway, meaning someone had been drunk and wrecked their car and took off to avoid being arrested.
There were several items found inside Maura's car. In the front seat, there was an open sky blue cooler. In the back seat, some of the items found included an open box of Franzia wine from the previous Saturday night, a suitcase filled with clothes, black gloves, a stuffed monkey, a diamond necklace, 2 textbooks, a book called Not Without Peril, the accident form she picked up for Fred, and a broken Chrysler car part that kind of resembles a side mirror. To this day, the Murrays still don't know why the broken part was in the car or who it belonged to. Other crucial items were found inside the car, but we'll talk more about that later in the episode. There was also a rag found in the tailpipe. When Maura's car began smoking due to the poor state it was in, Fred, her dad, told her to put a rag in the tailpipe as a temporary way to block smoke at a pinch if she had to drive it in order not to be stopped by police. So did Maura put the rag in the tailpipe after the crash in an attempt to clog any smoke if a police officer arrived on scene? Or had she been driving with it in the tailpipe for an extended period of time? Fred was asked to remove the rag from the tailpipe when he saw it 4 days after the accident and immediately recognized it as one of his old work towels. The Murrays don't know if it has ever been tested.
When Fred checked out Maura's car after the accident, he used a hidden spare key and started the car right up. It was still drivable. So that begs the question, why didn't she drive to the closest gas station? Maybe she decided her car was too unsafe to keep driving with the blown cylinder, so she stayed put to call AAA and wait for help instead. There is a dark, dirty mark on the interior of the A-pillar, the bar between the driver's side window and the windshield. Julie has spoken about this on TikTok and theorizes that it looks like maybe a dirty handprint or even a shoe print. If Maura had been pulled from the car, could this be the sign of a struggle? Julie did share that she does have some more insight into this, but it's not something she can share publicly for obvious reasons. Something significant was missing from the car, the rear view mirror. That style of mirror is attached with a screw, so it would have required some force to remove it. Not only was it not in the car, it's still never been found. And it's unknown if the mirror was on the scene when the car initially crashed. Maura's backpack, keys, cell phone, and the vodka and Kahlua she purchased were also missing from the car. Many different sources have stated that Maura packed a bag like she was going on a trip. But Julie takes issue with the word pack. Here's why.
I take issue with the word pack because if you look at the items that were found in Maura's car, if in fact she did pack, she did a horrible job because what she had was, and I'll just go down some of the items. She had one singular sock, not a pair of socks, one singular sock. Okay. That right there is huge to me because, that makes no sense, especially if you're going into New Hampshire, northern New Hampshire in February. And she's familiar with the area. She knows that she needs socks. You need socks to be up in that area in February. She had one singular sock. She had no underwear, zero. Another huge red flag. Like, what college-age woman doesn't, pack that? She had 2 bras. She had an assortment of random shirts. She had 5 gloves, so 2 pairs and then a singular glove. No hat, no heavy winter gear, no winter jacket, no boots, nothing like that. So it was just so random, the things that she had. And, people say that she was going to meet someone. And I know my sister. And when I look at what she had in the car, there's no chance she was going to meet someone, especially a guy, with that list of items. She would have at least had some sort of blouse or maybe some sort of dressier clothes, because she would always have that. And I'm speaking from experience. I've seen her go on trips before, and I know what she would pack. And she didn't have any of that. Now, I don't know exactly what she took with her because her backpack was missing. So perhaps she had a pile of socks in her backpack and some underwear, which would make all of this make sense. But as I see it, and based on what I know, it doesn't make sense, the items that she had.
When a person goes missing, the first 48 hours are crucial. Unfortunately for Maura, there was quite a bit of inaction and missed opportunity as soon as Cecil Smith arrived on the scene. The Saturn was registered to Fred and had a Massachusetts license plate and a UMass parking sticker on one of the windows. When Smith saw it was an out-of-state car, he should have immediately run the tags. Julie said they were told they ran the tags, but if that were true, why wasn't the family notified that Maura was missing until late Tuesday, almost a full day later? Fire and EMS were called to the scene, but were sent away after only 6 minutes when the driver of the car couldn't be found. It's hard to know what the protocol is in this situation, but the airbags had been deployed and the windshield was cracked in a way that showed the driver may have hit their head. There was also an open alcohol container in the car. So we're talking about a person who might be intoxicated with a head injury in freezing temperatures. 6 minutes is not enough time to thoroughly search the surrounding area for a potentially injured driver. This is a huge missed opportunity and a complete failure by the responders.
Because the Murrays didn't learn of Maura's disappearance until late Tuesday, Fred wasn't able to make it to Haverhill until dawn on Wednesday, the 11th. He arrived expecting to get an update on the status of the investigation and search, but no search had started. This immediately set the tone between the Murrays and law enforcement. I want to take a detour for a second here. Some sources say that Fred refused to cooperate or talk with investigators and even hired lawyers in his defense. But that's just not true. Fred was constantly trying to meet with them, but was repeatedly met with resistance, or given the standard, "We've looked into that." He did bring on 2 lawyers, but it was to go after the police for the case files under the Freedom of Information Act. He was suing them for information about his own daughter's case because they wouldn't tell him anything. That is infuriating. Okay, back to the evidence. There was a Coke bottle found on the scene under Maura's car that followers of this case have always assumed was hers. But the truth is, it's not that clear.
Well, the responding officer said that he noticed a strong odor of alcohol. I don't know. It's not clear to me whether it was actually tested or this is just based on his word. So it's weird because he claims that the bottle was under the car, but he wouldn't have seen the bottle until, I'm assuming until after the car was towed. I'm not sure the timeline. I don't know if they tested the bottle to see if it was even Maura's, if, we're just making a huge assumption here that it was Maura's because she had the wine in the car and it was in the vicinity of the car. But unless you test it for her DNA, which they have, then how can we be sure? So it's like Maura's case, we can't be sure of anything. And that's what's so frustrating.
And did they ever give you the results of that?
No. I don't know if they tested it. I think they did.
Okay.
You would think that would, you would think.
And the red stains that are in the car, I think it's so hard. I've heard that the box of wine spilled. Was that proven to be true? Or do we even know what those stains were from, or if they even happened in the crash, or were they already there?
Yeah, so the assumption is that they were from wine, but not from the box of wine. The box of wine was in the back seat. So it would have been hard for the wine to spill on the driver's side door panel and the ceiling. So the assumption is that there is some sort of open container that kind of exploded into those areas upon impact and when the airbags deployed.
And have those ever been tested to figure out what it was?
I don't know. I would assume, I would hope so, because that would be investigation 101, but.
Mm-hmm. Because, I don't know if Fred had seen the interior of the car lately. Did he know if any of the scuffs or marks had already been there prior to her having that accident?
Yeah, it was definitely new. So the red staining had not been there before. So the responding officer did take pictures of the vehicle that night. They haven't been made public, but I've seen them. And from what I've seen, that spill happened very closely to when he took those pictures.
If the Coke bottle or the stain on the door had been tested, it could have provided more clarification about who the bottle belonged to and if it even had anything to do with Maura at all. There were also 2 backpacks found on the scene. One was gone by the time law enforcement went to look into it, and the other one wasn't Maura's. We don't know if any testing has been done on the rogue backpack that was found. These aren't the only glaring missteps in the first days of the investigation, though. A search warrant was issued on the morning of Tuesday, February 9th to determine the driver of the car. At that point, they should have known it was registered to Fred from running the license. Investigators found several items with Maura's name, address, and phone number on them, which pointed to her more than likely being the driver of the vehicle. But that wasn't the only name and number found inside of the car.
Another thing that was found inside Maura's car was a handwritten name and number. And I just recently, within this past year, saw the search warrant for the first time. And so when I look at the items that were taken pursuant to that warrant Tuesday morning, and I'm reading the fact that this name and number was in Maura's car, I'm like, oh, well, of course, law enforcement reached out and kind of got to the bottom of that name and number. And I said, you know what? I'm just going to go ahead and call this number. And of course, the number was a landline, wasn't connected. So I did some research and I had some people help me. And I was able to figure out who the owner of that number was. Called that person. That was the first time that person had ever been contacted. So police didn't even call the name and number that was found inside Maura's car that they took possession of on Tuesday. So people wonder why my family's frustrated. There's one example. This woman is missing and you don't even dial that number to figure out if they have any information. So that's why it's, people are like, well, just, let the investigation happen. But for families in my position, we cannot just sit back and wait for something to happen, because then you find out there's so many lost opportunities, mishandled pieces of information, that we have to do our own investigation just to have peace of mind. You know what I mean? So that's the biggest thing is, finding out that number was never called, finding out that Maura called that condo owner in Bartlett, New Hampshire, and police never called her until months and months later, only after my family called her and said, hey, your number is in Maura's phone records from the day she disappeared. Do you remember what the conversation was? And the woman, Linda, was like, that was months ago. If you had asked me months ago, I would have had a better answer for you, but I just don't remember. And so another lost opportunity. Why weren't all the numbers associated with this missing woman called? Why did it take my family to call and then raise hell for them to act?
The number in Maura's car belonged to longtime friends of the Murray family. Her phone records indicate that she talked to someone with that phone number in January. Even if it was nothing, it's their job to follow up on it. When asked if she had any idea why Maura would take a last-minute trip on a school night, Julie genuinely has no clue. It doesn't make sense for her to go up to that area during a school week right after winter break. Yes, she had been stressed out and struggling, but would that be enough of a reason to jeopardize her nursing program? Julie shared that the things Maura packed were not her standard attire when meeting up with someone. She had seen her pack for trips before. There were no blouses, dresses, or any of the other normal items she would take when meeting someone else. And if she were meeting someone, wouldn't they have become concerned when she never showed up? No one has come forward saying they were meeting her that night. Or if they have, the Murrays aren't aware of it.
As we've mentioned, there have been many theories and stories spread about Maura's upbringing, her actions, and what was or was not found after she went missing. We aren't going to discuss those here because they hold no weight and do nothing but hurt Maura and her family. There has been quite a bit of victim blaming and tearing apart of Maura's character because of the mistakes she made in her young life. But honestly, who among us didn't make some poor choices as very young adults? No, we did. Maura's case is intriguing enough on its own. We don't need to sensationalize it. The Murrays are already navigating life with this horrible trauma, and now they have to defend themselves against things that never happened. It doesn't help the investigation and causes them more harm.
So some of Maura's mistakes and missteps as a 21-year-old kid trying to navigate life are put under a microscope. And when you look at them in isolation, they don't look good. They're dumb. She made some poor decisions, But when you just look at them in isolation and you don't look at the full total picture of who this human was, who was way more than just a single decision she made as a 21-year-old, then it gets distorted. And then that allows for people to rationalize exploitation. So, Maura was drinking underage. Okay, if you look at things like that, and you see it in all these cases, she was asking for it by wearing a certain thing. And it's this whole victim blamey thing, and it's disgusting. But it's a way for people to rationalize their exploitation, which is hurtful because then it makes the actual victim seem less than. And when a victim is seen as less than, what does that do to the investigation and the public? It makes them not worthy of resources. And in a missing person case, in unsolved murder cases, when you classify and bucket a victim as being less than and somehow undeserving of the resources, then the cases don't get solved and they're cold. And then 20 years later, you've got no forward progress. So that's something that's definitely had an impact on Maura's case, where, it's almost as if this straw man argument is made that my family said that Maura was this perfect, all-American, flawless person. But if you go back and you look, you'll never be able to quote anybody in my family saying Maura was perfect, all-American, and flawless. It's just this fake argument that was made so that somebody else could tear it down to get to that more sensationalized content, to where you can talk about this person as if they're less than. She's, the family's saying that she's perfect. Where have I ever said that Maura was perfect? You can't find it because it doesn't exist. Did Maura have amazing scores on her SATs? Yes, it's documented. I can prove that. Did she hold all kinds of records in running and cross country? Was she an amazing athlete? Yes, I can document that. But just because you look at that and you build this person up to be this, like goddess, doesn't mean it's my family saying that she was this flawless person. And it's just like this little game that people play to try to make a better story.
Professionals are supposed to be objective and do their homework with multiple sources and copious amounts of fact-checking. In Julie's words, you have to balance the public interest with what could be emotionally harmful to the people you're talking about. The Murrays have kind of been thrown to the wolves in a way. Things about their family that have absolutely nothing to do with Maura's disappearance have been put on the internet for the world to see. That isn't professionalism. That's tabloid-level content that pulls people away from the facts of Maura's disappearance and hurts a family that's already hurting. There have been multiple theories about what happened to Maura, but there's one that has been particularly harmful.
People that insinuating that my family helped Maura escape or helped her disappear, or we know that where she is, or we are the reason why she disappeared. Just nonsensical, crazy talk. Because anyone that knows my family knows that couldn't possibly be true. But more importantly, why the hell would my family put ourselves through this for 20 years if this is all just a ruse? I'm doing this for my own health, or my own selfish reasons. It's like, it's nonsensical. And so, you could kind of get away with that kind of talk early on, but come on, we're 20 years down the road. We don't know where Maura is. We didn't help her escape to wherever you think she is.
These theories make people think that Maura is undeserving of attention. An example of this is the fact that Julie says she sees comments online from people saying they're sick of hearing about the Maura Murray case. It's hurtful. You're talking about a human being that is loved and missed by so many people. The constant speculation and rumor mills saying she's just off somewhere are the reasons why people who consume this content believe that finding her isn't all that important. Julie mentioned the crazy insinuations about their dad being abusive as another example of sensationalism that takes away from Maura's investigation. She said if there's evidence of that, let's see it. But it doesn't exist, so there's no point in bringing it up if there's nothing to support it. Online trolls aren't the only people the Murrays have to contend with. There have been several strange things that have happened to them over the years. At a vigil for Maura one year, there was a man who called the venue and asked for Julie. Specifically, he had pertinent information for her about Maura's disappearance, but Julie had to meet him alone at his car in the parking lot. Needless to say, she didn't go. Here's Julie giving a few more examples of the weirder things they've dealt with.
I'll get emails saying they only will talk to my dad and they will only talk to him in person, and he has to come alone to their residence. And it's just like, my dad's going to do it because he's desperate, and he has done it. And I'm like, I don't like this. I don't like this, Dad. So things like that. And I got a message on a YouTube video that was covering the case, and it's this guy, and he says he has information and he needs to get in touch with me. And it's not like I'm hard to find. I'm all over social media. And so I eventually reach out to him, and he sends a response back saying he's got this information, but he's on vacation and he'll get back to me in a week. And of course, a week comes and goes. He doesn't respond. And then he just totally disappears. And I've never heard from him again. So it's just bizarre.
Besides the damage all of the misconceptions and rumors do to Maura's investigation, it has also forced Julie to create boundaries for herself when it comes to who she talks to and the information she shares. She has done a lot of interviews for various projects where she was told that the narrative will be fact-based, but it ends up being sensational fluff or full of the creator's own personal theories and untrue statements. Now she cringes at some of the things she's been a part of. She shared that in the beginning, you are so vulnerable and it makes you an easy target. People take advantage of that and it opens you up for getting hurt. Creators in the true crime space should want to help lift up families, not hurt them more. Living with a murdered or missing family member is a big enough battle as it is.
It's something that you cannot prepare for. It's something that you couldn't possibly understand unless you've had it happen to you. Words aren't adequate to be able to describe what it feels like. But, I didn't ask for this. I learned along the way. I didn't get a guidebook. I didn't get rules and processes and a to-do list or anything like that. Families like mine are just kind of thrust into the middle of it, and we just have to sink or swim and figure it out. And so as the years progress, you kind of get better at compartmentalizing what you're dealing with in terms of the investigation, what you're dealing with in terms of your emotions, what you're dealing with in terms of distractions. And so in my mind, I feel like it's this big file cabinet, and I've been able to compartmentalize each aspect of it. And one of those file cabinets is, oh, hey, yeah, like your own life, And it's crazy how many file cabinets that I have in my mind that are just dedicated to this thing that happened to me. My sister vanished. And I still have to be a functioning human. I still have to contribute to society. And I still need to be able to find purpose in what happened. And I can't just sit around and think of woe is me and, kind of just not be productive, because if I just go down a self-destructive path, I'm not going to be able to be effective in terms of figuring out what happened to my sister. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes into it, but the hardest thing is the ambiguity of it all. And so when people deal with loss and traditional loss, they are able to go through the stages of loss in sort of this linear process. And with ambiguous loss, like not knowing what happened and having no answers, you're not able to go through that grieving process. So you're kind of you get stuck. And that is really, really hard mentally, psychologically, emotionally, to try to live what your new normal life is. And always constantly in the back of your head, think about what if, and I just don't know, and, and blame yourself and second guess. And that's the hardest part, is the unknowing and living with the unknowing.
Do you find yourself having to force yourself to make time for yourself and give yourself some grace,
Yeah. And that's something that the military helped me with. And, I talked early on about how I'm all this structure and discipline, and I love all that, and time management. That's actually really, really been helpful for me. And I think it's allowed me to be as effective as I have been in terms of managing all of the stress and emotions that go with this, is my military and my leadership training from the Army in West Point. So I'm thinking, oh, there was a purpose for me to have to go through all this BS. And it's because eventually this tragedy is going to happen to me, and I'm going to need to be able to be good at time management. I'm going to need to be good at handling my emotions and not being impulsive and not lashing out, because I don't know if you've seen some of the things that are written about my family online, but if I was to just emotionally respond to all of this stuff online, it would be so bad and such a huge distraction to the goal, which is to find my sister. And so my ability to kind of distance myself from that has been very helpful.
In addition to working her day job and spending the rest of her time advocating for Maura, Julie recently founded the New Hampshire Murdered and Missing Unsolved Coalition with Jane Borowski, the only survivor of the Connecticut Green River Valley killer, and her friend Amanda.
I was connected to Jane Borowski, who is the only survivor of the Connecticut River Valley killings, which happened in the 80s in New Hampshire and Vermont area. And so I linked up with Jane, and we just started talking, and she's an amazing person. And I invited her to Maura's vigil up in New Hampshire. And so she was like, absolutely. And she follows Maura's case and all that. And she's up there in New Hampshire. She lives locally. So she shows up to Maura's vigil, and I introduce her to everyone, and we're chit-chatting it up. And I say to her and her friend Amanda, who is another amazing human, I said, wouldn't it be awesome if we kind of banded together? And I don't know whether it was my idea. I don't want to take full credit for it, but it was a conversation that we had collectively between the three of us about, hey, we should join forces and try to make some change and get some answers, because her case is still unsolved as well. And I was like, cool, like, let's do this. And so then we set up Zoom meetings, and we got together, and we were just chit-chatting it up, and we're like, let's do something, and let's march to the AG's office. And so that's kind of how it started. And then we got connected to other victims and survivors that had missing and unsolved cases in the state of New Hampshire. And we just came up with this march, and we started this coalition. And it's been amazing to connect with other people and not feel as alone, because we all have different circumstances in terms of our cases. But we all share the same grievances. And so it's good to just have that community of people that are in this club that no one wants to be in, and to kind of be able to lean on each other. So we marched to the AG's office this past August, and were able to voice our concerns And that was just step one. And so since that time, we've connected with other families who wanted to join the coalition. And so there'll be other events and efforts in the future. But it's amazing and something that I'm proud to be a part of.
That's very cool. So do you have any other events planned right now?
Yeah, in the works. We need to figure out what our next steps are.
Julie also began her Engage with Empathy campaign in 2022 after seeing the empathy crisis happening in the true crime space. In her experience, this lack of empathy has allowed creators and consumers to take in the worst days of people's lives as entertainment and passively consume their tragedies during their morning commute or daily chores. She made the decision to be more vulnerable and saw that by talking to people face to face over Zoom or on the phone, they were able to put themselves in her shoes a little bit better rather than passively consuming her story on their way to work.
That little spark of empathy made Julie realize that people in the true crime community can be a force for good, and they want to be. We just need to allow them to consume information through a more empathetic lens, which is going to require people like Julie to be more vulnerable. This realization created a positive change in the way she viewed the true crime space and inspired her to create the Engage with Empathy campaign.
I instantly felt better, and I'm making these connections, and people are saying, oh, I always thought this about you, but now I talk to you and I don't think that anymore. And I'm like, oh, that's because you see me as a human and not this character that you read about. Isn't that crazy that that's how that happened? So I said, enough is enough. I'm going to do this Engage with Empathy campaign. And so I created this little acronym, and it's called CARE, and it's really simple and easy to remember. And it's kind of the roadmap for how people should be consuming and creating, in my mind, from my experience, true crime. And the first pillar, I guess you'd say, is the C, and that's center the victim. And, we've talked about that ad nauseum. Obviously, the victim should be the centerpiece in these stories. Otherwise, why are you doing it? And then A is avoid harmful speculation. We talked about how speculation is hurtful in terms of the investigation, as well as for the families left behind in terms of resource allocations and things like that. And energy allocations, emotional energy allocations on the side of the family members that are just struggling to make it. And then R is research responsibly. This is a big one in my sister Maura's case because there's so much misinformation, and people feel like if they just read it somewhere that it must be true, and people need to take a more active role in what they're doing and don't just assume that everything on the internet is true, because I can tell you it's not. And then E, engage with empathy, because families like mine didn't choose these paths, and we don't have a way out. And so engaging us with a little bit of empathy is going to help us be more vulnerable and share more to hopefully move the investigation forward. Because a lot of times people develop this mistrust for creators and the media, and are just kind of turtle up and don't want to share and don't want to talk about. And that's really, really problematic, especially for these voiceless victims. If the people that knew them the best are now not able to trust creators and media types, then their stories are going to get lost and people aren't going to pay attention. And that's the worst possible outcome for the victims. And so that's why it's so important to just be a good human. It's not hard. There's no cost involved to just be a good human and treat these tragedies with a little bit of empathy.
As for what we as creators can do for the families who shut down and don't want to talk to us, it's simple. We just need to listen.
A lot of times people approach these families or victims or survivors as potential content. And having been in this space for 2 decades now, I know when people are only talking to me because they want to land an interview or they want to create an episode and they need my voice behind it. It's very, very evident. And I'm able to kind of weed through those, but there's tragedies happening all the time, and you've got these vulnerable families that are just vying for attention, and they'll say yes to anything and anybody, and people take advantage of that. And so it's important to treat them as if they're humans and not content. And it shouldn't be that difficult to do. And don't treat them as if, I've had situations where people just want to ask me those questions to get me to cry. And it's like, oh, that just doesn't feel right. It's not like this magical formula that you need. Just listen. And treat them as if, that they are who they are. They're human. They're going through a tragedy, and they're not content. And if at the end of you spend an hour talking to a family member, and at the end they're like, you know what, I don't want any of that on record, that's their choice. You shouldn't be angry at them. You're like, I just wasted my time. No, they opened up and let you in for an hour of their life, and at the end they just didn't feel comfortable, and that's fine.
Victims' families don't owe the media or other content creators anything. It's really not fair that Julie had to create a TikTok account to dispel the ridiculousness around Maura's case and constantly put herself out there. It's important that she does it, though, because it creates a safe pathway for other people in her position to show them that it can be a safe space, and there are other people who care and want to support them. Speaking of wanting to show support, Maura's 20-year vigil will be held next February in New Hampshire. There's a tentative plan, and Julie will release more information in the next few months. We'll be sure to share it here as well. Every year, Julie tells her brothers and her dad how tired she is of holding the vigil, but there are people who want to be there and hold space for the Murrays, so they'll keep doing it until Maura is found and brought back home.
We are so thankful to Julie for letting us share Maura's story and focus on who Maura was and what it has been like to navigate life with a missing family member. When consuming true crime content, it's important to remember that you are listening to a story about a real human being, and I think it's easy to lose sight of that when we're taking in so much of it.
For more information about Maura's disappearance, visit MauraMurrayMissing.org or follow Julie on TikTok at Maura Murray Missing. Whatever you do, avoid Reddit, forums, or any other websites full of the opinions of random people on the internet. One thing you can do is tell a friend about the podcast.
Until next time, stay safe
And make good choices. Bye.
Bye.